recently watched a video by YouTube user Bree Sarek. Bree Zarek, I'm sorry if I'm butchering your name, in which she talks about the 3 times that she was sexually assaulted. After watching the video, I think the first incident she was a victim of was indecent exposure, aka sexual misconduct, when her neighbor, um, the guy who was stalking her, exposed himself and then masturbated in front of her. But from after looking at what assault is, uh, technically I'd say that incident counts as assault too. Now, the second incident, when she was in boarding school or college, when that guy would just, accost her and kiss and fondle her without her consent, that was assault. And the third incident, with her boyfriend at the time doing something sexual to her that she didn't like, and she said it made her feel like a dog, um, because she didn't express outright what that act was. And I mean, it's her right not to, she doesn't have to go into specifics if she doesn't want to. Um, and that doesn't mean that something awful did not happen. So um, I'm just gonna go by how she views it. If she thinks that it was an assault, then then it was. When you're in a relationship with someone, or if like you're married to someone, you don't cast off all of your autonomy and your agency. You don't just throw away the right to consent or not consent to sex, or any sex acts. And I think that's something we've been culturally conditioned to believe. And from Bree's account, it looks like that was the case for her as well, because compromise. Anyway, YouTube user and MRA Girl Writes What, Karen Strong, chose to basically diminish Bree's experiences with yeah, you just felt assaulted, so you think assault happened, but it really didn't, and if you didn't want these things to happen, why didn't you do something about it? See what being a feminist has done to you? Stop being a victim. And oh my God, look at what the men go through. They are much, much worse off than you. Um, yeah. This type of stance or argument is something that I see used a lot by anti-feminists. They basically use it to brush off a woman or a feminist's experiences or argument, to just brush it off as unimportant or irrelevant, or not as important as their argument or point of view. When in reality, it turns out that both sides are extremely important issues. And this one occurrence or experience and its importance doesn't negate the occurrence or importance of the other occurrence, which for me makes it clear that anti-feminists they don't give a shit about equality, but of maintaining the status quo. And they pretty much are guilty of doing what they accuse feminists of doing, prioritizing one sex or gender over the other. They feel and think that, save a few gender roles and expectations that they don't want men to continue to, be beholden to, that the world is all right as it is, and any attempts to bring about change is a threat. And what's the best way to deal with a perceived threat, at least for anti-feminists? To spread misinformation about their perceived enemy, which is feminism, accusing feminists of doing what MRAs do in general to them, thereby making feminists and feminism in general out to be the real problem, instead of, society and our cultural, in our culture in general, that perpetuates the norms that pretty much make men and women suffer. Excuse me for the sniffling. Maybe it's just me though, but when MRAs storm angrily into my Twitter feeds, insulting me and diminishing my lived experiences, um, that's not them attempting to express their feelings or express, how they've been forced to live up to toxic definitions of what being a man is and all of that shit. They're just behaving like children. And that's the issue that I have with the MRM, with the men's rights movement as it is today. It spends the majority of the proponents, the people who are behind this, spend the majority of their time attempting to villainize feminism instead of giving a genuine critique or just bringing up what goes on with men and boys and challenging the status quo of hypermasculinity, deconstructing society's antiquated definition of masculinity and how it affects boys and men. Karen then goes on to blame Bree for her own troubles and assaults that happened to her, questioning her status as an independent person, if she won't take measures to protect herself and depending on the government to do that for her. Never mind that women do and have done and try everything and anything to protect themselves, and shit still happens anyway. And stats have shown that, but putting the onus on women to prevent sexual misconduct, assault, rape is much easier than putting the blame for these incidents on the perpetrator, where it belongs. I wonder if Girl Rights What would express the same sentiments if it were a boy or a man talking about being sexually assaulted and not Bree. The fact that Bree even decided to take that guy who exposed himself to her to court and have him arrested is proof that she took action to ensure that the stalking and harassment would cease. So Karen's critique of Bree is not only fallacious, but just downright harsh and dismissive. And it illustrates a serious lack of empathy towards those in her gender who don't share her views. And while it is true that the rhetoric of mainstream feminism has its problems, it most certainly does. Girl Rights What and other anti-feminist assumptions of feminism as pushing learned helplessness or professional victimhood just for addressing sexist issues and, bringing these things that happen to light in public forums makes zero sense. While there are those mainstream feminists who may have an interest um, in having certain issues being seen as unsolvable to increase their influence and privilege over others, the overall goal of sharing these types of experiences is to establish solidarity with others who've endured the same and to normalize the act of talking about these things, which would mean that feminists have a vested interest in solving problems, not having them labeled as unsolvable and perpetuating, some gender politics Cartman drama triangle. Now, part of me has tried to keep away from the mainstream feminism, anti-feminist squabbles, because for the most part, the idea of knowing what I should be grateful for as a woman, as as Girl Rights What states in her video, as a Black woman, I have no fucking clue what that means. Black women are and have been the mules of the world for centuries. We're expected not just to suck it up and endure the worst via racist struggle, but sexist struggle as well. Our lives and experiences are dismissed and diminished daily. And those two struggles intersect so much that most of what Karen says in regards to women being better off than men, I have no clue what the fuck she's talking about. But with the straw man feminism that Girl Writes What has been describing throughout the video, you know, part of me, it just got way too annoying and I just couldn't really take it anymore. Especially with the misunderstanding of the phrase, teach them not to rape. I mean, for fuck's sake, according to a survey done not too long ago, 50% of high school boys and 42% of high school girls said that there's times when it's okay for a man to hold a woman down and force her to have sex with him. And being that the majority of rapes that occur happen during dates, there's obviously an issue in regards to what people in general, what people define as rape in general. I do kind of feel now that the message doesn't need to be taught to just boys. Um, doesn't need to be taught to just boys. You know, it needs, you know, everyone. We all need to learn that and relearn that. Everyone, you know, regardless of what gender or what sex you are and what orientations we have, um, we are all capable of rape, and a conversation about what rape is, including date rape and spousal rape, um, and what informed and affirmative consent is, needs to happen. Now, in regards to how men and women are treated, when talking about all the types of violence and all that, that's not really the fault of feminism. Contrary to what anti-feminists may say, we don't live in a feminist society or a feminist culture. Now, I can only speak from what I've seen in the States because that's where I live and reside, but I don't think we would be dealing with attacks on reproductive rights from our legislation, and all the attempts to close abortion clinics across the country if we were living in a feminist culture. And if feminists are supposedly the biggest perpetrators of the dismissal of men's issues and concerns, why did feminists and women's groups successfully petition that the FBI change its definition of rape to include men as victims of rape? It's not feminists or feminism that perpetuate the status quo. Well, maybe like some do because, you know, of the paradigm within the rhetoric, and that there are feminists out there who haven't taken the time to allow the ideology to adapt and evolve to include men in the struggle to end sexism and sexist oppression, and to and which includes dismantling patriarchal norms that they've internalized and are the cause of things that Karen, Girl Writes What, brings up in regards to how men are treated when they're victims of violence and basically overall in society. You know, the norms that tell men that they have to be emotionally unavailable to be seen as strong, and that expressing their emotions makes them weak, that women are weaker and are objects of sexual conquest, that disregarding a woman's ability to consent and their autonomy are healthy and normal expressions of male sexuality, that it's okay to force a woman to have sex with you, that if she's dressed a certain way, she's asking to be treated a certain way and is an indicator of her value, and that the same will be thought of you. These are the concepts that a patriarchal society and culture teaches everyone. That's not the fault of feminism. Hell, a friend of mine on Twitter, while he was coming to defend a feminist friend of his who was dealing with verbal abuse from MRAs, he revealed, was a guy, he revealed that he was sexually assaulted as a child. And those MRAs dismissed his experience. They said that, oh, he asked for it and that he was lying and that he wasn't really raped because, you know, apparently to them, women aren't capable of raping men and boys. But wait a minute. Isn't that an anathema to the supposed MRA stance of caring about what happens to men and boys who are victims of rape and sexual assault? Like, this talking out of both sides of the face is a telltale sign to me that, you know, that one is dealing with a reactionary movement, not one to be taken all that seriously, as is the misogynistic diminishment of one's experiences that Girl Writes What does to Bree in this video, via the whole, you feel more vulnerable, so you are, and you feel more endangered, so you are. And it's just like like the contempt is so palpable. And it's really despicable. With the incident of the guy exposing himself to her, Bree took him to court, so she did do something. When feminists state that it isn't on the onus of women to prevent sexual assault, that's not saying, oh, if someone attacks you, don't fight back, or something along those lines. So that's a straw man. And for all those who are like, well, why didn't you do this or that, and feel that they can say what, and you know, what they would do if they were in a certain situation, I'm calling bullshit on that. Stop pretending that you're fucking uber prepared for every single thing that could go wrong, because that's impossible for anyone to do. When a sexual assault is taking place, the victim slash survivor goes into shock, and most of the time they're unable to really do anything. And I think those who are so quick to judge survivors for an understandable lack of action, they either haven't experienced sexual assault or they are seriously lacking empathy. With the guy she was dating and with that guy in boarding school, Bree was only doing what she'd been socially conditioned and expected to have done in those instances. Just let the guy do whatever he wants to her sexually, and that she should want it. Power to say no. You know, knowing that you know, have the agency to say no isn't something that is taught to women by society, though that's changing little by little thanks to feminism. You know, and though that might work a bit better for, you know, for white women with, you know, some negligible consequences, for black women and other women of color, saying no and verbally expressing disinterest when it comes to men trying to get their attention, has resulted in physical attacks and gun violence. Like last year, this black woman, she was at this after funeral event, and she was approached by this guy who she told that she was married. And the man left, came back with a gun, and shot and killed her, all for rejecting him. Now, that's not to say that men and boys aren't negatively affected via society and the gender expectations that society places onto them, but to just, you know, prop those experiences up on a pedestal, meanwhile dismissing women's experiences and throwing them under the bus just to push an ideological narrative, which is pretty much all Girl Writes What did in her video. That's pretty disgusting. And before anyone with two brain cells say that I'm pushing the idea that women might as well do nothing when it comes to assault or whatever, no. all I'm doing is bringing this up to broaden perspectives. There's nuance to this shit, and we need to be able to consider it when trying to come up with solutions. The problem isn't just that Bree at that time felt that she lacked agency to say no or to do anything, because, that's what society and the mainstream media and the culture taught her. It's also the harmful ways that society has taught men to go about expressing their sexuality, feeling entitled and owed a person's body and attention, seeing women as weaker than them, and that disregarding their boundaries and agencies to, go forth and make them an object of sexual conquest, things like that. And once again, contrary to what Girl Writes What says, feminism does not teach helplessness. At least the type of feminism that, I practice and others that I've seen practice. We discuss things like this. We discuss the impact that society and its, expectations in regards to gender and stuff. We discuss the effects that it's had on women and men, and bring it to light to look for a solution. That's not telling women or men to just throw away their agency and do nothing. If you really care about the state of men and boys and deconstructing the toxicity that is Western masculinity, or excuse me, that is within Western masculinity, check out mensmovement.com. It's fairly new. The site focuses more on creating a positive evolution of masculinity and questions society's definition for being a man and manhood without being hateful towards feminists and feminism, or even MRAs for that matter. The site purely cares about addressing the issues men and boys face within the culture. And I think A Voice for Men could stand to learn from that site. Well, I mean, if they actually cared about the causes that they push.